The fields were painted in amber and gold hues as the sun rose over the Roloff farm. Despite the storm that was building inside the Roloff home, the birds continued to chirp happily. A mountain of debts and past-due notifications loomed before Zach Roloff as he sat at the kitchen table, an avalanche he was unable to ascend. Every page felt more substantial than the one before it, crushing an unseen weight against his shoulders. Zach had been trying to hide the concern for months, keeping up a front of composure for Tori and the kids. But lately, he found himself pacing the floors late at night while staring at numbers he couldn't change because even the most basic tasks felt like a chore. The farm, which had previously been a source of comfort and pride, now appeared to taunt him with its subdued abundance. Fields of crops, barns brimming with machinery, and yet a bank account that was getting less every day. The first tiny changes Tori noticed were Zach sighing when he opened the mailbox, his frowning at the ledger, or the faint trembling of his fingers when holding his morning coffee. Hey guys, hope you are well. Please do subscribe, give this video a thumbs up. Her questions were kind, but Zach dismissed them with evasive assurances. His tense jaw betrayed him as he said, "It's nothing, just work stress." The kids could feel it too. Jackson stopped reaching for a toy when he saw his father's scowling expression. Lila held Tori a little tighter, feeling the familiar safety of their house, now tinged with anxiety. Although the Roloff family had previously experienced hardship, the weight of growing expenses and obligations felt different, heavier, more absorbing, and unavoidable. Zach was finally able to face the reality he had been evading as the morning sun rose higher. The pain in his gut grew as he tallied up the debts, deducted the savings, and counted the numbers. Something had to give. There has to be a change. However, what could he do before the financial pressures entirely closed in? As Zach gazed out the window over the fields he had toiled in since he was a youngster, he pondered whether the answer he needed would be too costly for him to accept, one that might have an impact on their family's core as well as their income. That afternoon was unusually quiet in the house. The sunlight shining through the window highlighted the wrinkles on Zach's forehead as he sat at his desk in the living room corner. He had reached his breaking point because of the expenses, the growing debt, and the strain to keep the farm solvent. After hours of evaluating loans, calculating calculations, and analyzing choices, nothing seemed quick enough to halt the hemorrhage. Zach came up with a dramatic, irrevocable solution in a moment of despair. He might be able to sell some of the family's assets. He had never thought of doing it, not casually, and definitely not without Tori's help. However, all worries were obscured by the idea of finally easing the immediate financial hardship. Zach picked up the phone and dialed the real estate agent, his hands trembling a little. The discussion was brief, transactional, and conclusive. Believing that action was more vital than caution, he signed agreements he hardly read, listed the land, and organized the paperwork. He saw the sale as a lifeline, a short-term solution to support their family. However, a tiny voice of skepticism muttered in the back of his head even as he hung up. This was more than just land. It was a legacy he and Tori had shared since the day they first arrived to the farm, as well as memories and family history. He made an effort to quell his doubts by telling himself that while money could be replenished, trust was much more difficult to restore once it had been damaged. Zach listened to his children's gentle breathing as they slept in their bedrooms later that night. He hoped the transaction would spare them from impending financial ruin and that he had made the correct decision. However, he understood in his heart that the consequences would go beyond just the figures on a ledger. This decision, which had been made under duress and in a hurry, was going to put his marriage, his family's stability, and the trust that had seemed indestructible to the test. Zach sat by himself on the porch, gazing out at the black fields as night descended over the farm. He came to the realization in the silence that sometimes the answers we choose in moments of fear come at the highest cost, and he was unaware of how high that cost would be. Warm streaks appeared on the surface as the early sun filtered through the kitchen window. When Tori Roloff's phone buzzed with a notification, she had just finished brewing coffee. She initially thought it was just another routine warning, like a social media post or email. But her eyes widened in shock as she read the words. The land. Sold. A beat skipped across her heart. The words sounded like a cruel joke, unreal. She gazed at the screen, hoping that the notice was a mistake of some sort and that she had misread it. However, everything was there. The dates, the numbers, and the agent's affirmation. She was unaware that Zach had sold some of their family's property. A frigid, mounting rage replaced the morning's warmth in an instant. Tori's thoughts were racing. How could he have done this without her knowledge? Not even talking about it. The property was more than just land. It represented their lives together, their memories, and their labors. Zach was quietly going over the same invoices he normally did in the living room when she briskly made her way there. At first her speech was steady, but the tranquility was broken by harsh edges. What is this, Zach? Startled, he raised his head. He could tell the confrontation had started as soon as he saw Tori's expression. His voice was low but guarded as he confessed. I sold a portion of the property. I didn't think there was any other way to improve the financial status. Tori's brows widened as she felt a mixture of hurt and incredulity. What did you do? Without speaking to me at all. Zach, you can't just sell that land. Zach spoke incoherently as he attempted to explain. Tori, I was attempting to keep us safe and deal with the debt before it worsened. I had the thought, I don't give a damn about your opinion. Tori cut in, raising her voice. You failed to consider us. You failed to consider the children. Everything changes because of the decision you just made. As the debate intensified, the room appeared to contract around them. Long-suppressed feelings of frustration, despair, and dread suddenly surfaced, normally composed under duress. Zach felt Tori's rage as if it were a physical blow. Tori, on the other hand, found it difficult to control her emotions as she fought to accept the fact that the man she trusted the most had behaved irresponsibly and alone. The silent strain of a family standing on the brink of a rift was carried by the wind that rustled through the trees outside. In order to avoid exposing the kids to the storm before they fully comprehended it, neither of them spoke to them just yet. However, the harm had already started. Once trust was lost, it was difficult to rebuild, and the Roloff family sensed the beginnings of a breach that would require patience, time, and a great deal of work to heal. Zach understood as he gazed at Tori that he had sacrificed something far more valuable, her trust in him, and possibly even the tranquility of their home, in order to save the family from financial catastrophe. The days after the discovery were tense and burdensome. The normally lively Roloff home seemed more subdued, even tense, with the hum of everyday tasks and laughter. Every exchange between Tori and Zach was deliberate and cautious, as if they were both walking on thin glass. Zach made modest attempts to set things right. In an effort to demonstrate that his intentions had been genuine, he prepared breakfast, took on extra work, and tried to have a nice chat with Tori. But cautious mistrust greeted each gesture. Tori was unable to get rid of the hurt that had become ingrained in her. The property was more than just land. It represented everything they had created together and was a physical reminder of their past that had been abruptly stolen from her. Sensing the uneasiness, the kids too started acting strangely. Jackson, who was often gregarious and easygoing, became more reserved and frequently stayed close to his mother to get comfort. At bedtime, Lila held on to Tori a bit more, as if she were naturally trying to ease the tension that pervaded the room. Every time Zach saw their anxious gaze, he felt a twinge of remorse because he knew that his choices had an impact on people other than Tori and himself. Zach eventually made an effort to speak with Tori in a serious manner one evening as the sun was setting behind the trees. Carefully and sincerely, he described the sense of urgency, the restless nights, and the terrible burden of debt that he had experienced. He assured her that his only intention was to keep the family from going bankrupt and that he had no intention of hurting her. Tori listened, but her disappointment and rage were still palpable. She understood his difficulty, but she also made it apparent that answers by themselves could not restore trust. With a steady but emotionally charged voice, she replied, "I understand why you felt pressured, but we are supposed to face challenges together. We are everyone impacted by decisions like this, not just you." The words were a harsh reality for Zach. Despite his best efforts to save the family, his actions had instead sparked a more serious dilemma involving communication, trust, and emotional ties. The cost was far higher than he had expected, but the property had been sold and the money was in their account. Zach and Tori took the first hesitant steps toward reconciliation in the days that followed. The tension was reduced by brief talks, tactful apologies, and quality time spent with the kids, but neither could deny the impact of what had transpired. Although the Roloff family has previously weathered hurricanes, this crisis was unique. It required more than just fortitude. It required self-reflection, endurance, and a readiness to mend the broken relationship. With fields rustling in the wind and livestock grazing in peace, the farm outside carried on with its serene rhythm. The world appeared to be the same, but within the Roloff household, a lesson had been learned. That hurried decisions may put even the strongest families to the test, and that some mistakes leave scars that can only be healed by time, love, and understanding. Zach sat by himself on the porch in the nearly agonizing silence of the night. The air was filled with the gentle murmur of crickets, but it did little to calm the mental tempest he was experiencing. He gazed at the fields that had served as the setting for countless joyful memories, but were now overshadowed by the consequences of his recent choices. Once a sign of safety and heritage, the land he had sold now felt like a wound in the family's heart. Zach felt the stress engraved deeply into his flesh as he rubbed his hands over his face. Indeed, he had acted in desperation, but in doing so, he had shattered trust, which is far more valuable than money. He was reminded of peaceful evenings spent with Tori beneath the stars, family picnics on the property, and the sound of the kids laughing resonating through the fields. Every recollection brought a twinge of regret, a reminder that the monetary respite he had gained had come at an emotional price he had not foreseen. Tori was just as restless inside. As she walked through the house in silence, she thought about the quarrel, the shock of the sale, and the subsequent discussions. She wanted to forgive Zach right away because she knew he had been under a lot of stress. The idea of such a unilateral decision being taken again made her shudder in yet another way. How could she have faith that things would be different in the future? Unaware of the extent of the adult quarrel, the youngsters felt the tension that persisted. The warmth of home was muted, and their usually jovial conversation was muted. Zach understood that everyone he loved had been impacted by this ripple effect, which went much beyond his personal concern. Zach realized the truth he had been avoiding as he watched the moon rise over the farm. Money could temporarily fix issues, but it could never take the place of love, honesty, or communication. One issue may have been alleviated by the sale, but another may have been created that will take months or even years to resolve. Silently, he decided to improve, to listen, to speak, to repair what had been harmed. He was aware that it wouldn't be simple and that he couldn't rush Tori's forgiveness. However, he also realized that families survived because individuals made the decision to face mistakes head-on with courage, patience, and humility rather than because they never happened. Under the silent sky that night, Zach Roloff vowed to himself to take responsibility for his actions, to defend his family emotionally and financially, and to fight, really fight, for the togetherness and trust that had made his home a home. The days after the sale of the property were lengthy and stressful. Even though Zach and Tori had made some hesitant progress toward healing, his choice had repercussions outside of their house. Friends, neighbors, and even extended family were aware of the tension, and every conversation was tinged with interest and unanswered concerns. More people had heard about the sale than Zach had anticipated. Concerned and judgmental, family members contacted to inquire how such a snap decision could have been taken. While some questioned his judgment and expressed sympathy for the financial strain he had been under, Others suggested that the Roloff legacy was more than simply money. It represented stability, history, and trust. Zach was sucked into a maelstrom of defenses and explanations. Every discussion needed to be carefully worded because one incorrect statement may rekindle Tori's rage or increase family skepticism. Even small social events turned into diplomatic drills. Beneath the cautious laughter and strained smiles was the unsaid stress brought on by the transaction. Tori, on the other hand, was under constant observation. She struggled to decide whether to voice her disappointment or protect Zach. She was reminded of the betrayal of trust by every phone call and every remark made by a family member. She was concerned about how the family's reputation and legacy could be viewed in addition to the immediate impact on their marriage. Despite being mainly protected from overt information, the kids started to notice minute changes in how people interacted. Jackson observed uneasy glances and murmured conversations between grown-ups across the dining table. In her play, Lila appeared more reserved and careful. As Zach saw the effects of his acts ripple outward like waves from a stone thrown into a still pond, he recognized that the emotional impact was now multi-generational. Zach felt the burden of responsibility more keenly than ever and sat in contemplation for long evenings. He realized that recovering financially was just one aspect of the situation. It took time, openness, and a readiness to confront hard realities to mend trust, soothe loved ones, and stabilize the family's reputation. The farm itself had not altered. The fields were still bright in the sunlight, the barns were still sturdy, and the animals were still going about their daily lives. However, things had changed in the Roloff home. Zach understood that repairing relationships damaged by pride, anxiety, and hurt required more emotional work than the figures on a ledger. Zach thus made a silent promise as the dusk shadows spread out over the property. Although he couldn't reverse the mistakes he had made, he could face them head-on, gradually restore trust, and make sure the Roloff family remained stronger over time. If he was prepared to battle for the family's emotional well-being as well as their financial stability. Even though there had been some token acts of reconciliation in the weeks since the home sale, the fundamental conflict in the Roloff household had not been addressed. Every exchange between Tori and Zach was laden with unsaid annoyances, and every look seemed to contain a query neither of them was prepared to address. A family get-together at a close relative's property one afternoon served as the impetus for an inevitable altercation. While Zach and Tori's tense silence was evident, other members of the extended family engaged in friendly conversation. Occasionally, murmurs flowed in their direction. Compassionate remarks, nuanced inquiries, and covert assessments of the recent real estate transaction. At last, at a silent moment by the barn, Tori lost control of her feelings. "Zach," she said in a shrill, shaking voice, "I can't keep acting like everything is fine. That real estate transaction wasn't merely an error. It was treacherous, and I feel like my faith in you ebbs and flows each time I attempt to put it behind me." In an attempt to regain his composure, Zach inhaled deeply. "I know I made a mistake, Tori," he said softly. "I believed I was keeping the family safe and afloat. I should have spoken to you first, but I didn't give it any thought." Unshed tears sparkled in Tori's eyes. Keeping the family safe? By taking an all-encompassing, unilateral decision? Me, the children, all of us? Do you consider that to be protection? Voices resounded throughout the open farm as the debate got louder. Unsure whether to step in or let the tension play out, some family members paused their talks to observe. Zach and Tori circled the emotional battlefield, their words piercing yet grounded in love and fear. Zach's frustration matching Tori's hurt. "Money won't solve this." Tori's voice broke as she exclaimed, "I need to know that you will talk to me and that we will work together to solve problems." "Zach, I'm able to forgive you, but I'll never forget this disrespect for our family." Zach drooped his shoulders. "I understand. Furthermore, I don't anticipate forgiveness right now. I simply don't want us to be destroyed by this. If you don't mind, I would like to rebuild." The confrontation's intensity left them emotionally and physically spent. The family around them gave them room, understanding that this was a momentous occasion. As Zach and Tori pondered their unvarnished honesty, a heavy but necessary silence descended. A glimmer of clarity appeared for the first time since the property sale. They came to the conclusion that avoiding confrontation had just made the split wider, and that the only way to move past the suffering was to confront it head-on, even if it was challenging. They realized that trust could only be restored by openness, tolerance, and a shared willingness to face difficult realities. Zach and Tori stood together, worn out yet bound by a tenuous bond as the sun sank below the far-off hills, bathing the farm in a warm glow. Although the Roloff family had reached a breaking point, they also saw the opportunity of healing, if they were prepared to put in the necessary effort during that confrontational time. Once a haven of routine and serenity, the Roloff farm suddenly felt like a boiling pot. Within the close-knit community, word of the home sale had spread, bringing with it unsolicited counsel, whispered talks, and strange looks. Zach and Tori felt exposed and criticized as friends and neighbors approached them with inquiries, warnings, or words of sorrow. Jackson and Lila, the kids, were not exempt from the stress. Their teachers observed minor behavioral shifts. Lila clung more to Tori after school, while Jackson appeared preoccupied throughout class. Even small arguments or light-hearted quarrels at home were infused with the weight of adult concerns. Every time Zach witnessed their innocence being impacted by the storm he had let loose, he felt a twinge of regret. Zach was fixing a fence beside the barn one afternoon when a neighbor came by. With caution, the neighbor remarked, "I heard about the property." Zach nodded and forced a kind grin, but he felt the sting of scrutiny on the inside. "I hope you're both handling it okay." Every choice he made and action he took appeared to be watched. Tori, meanwhile, had to discreetly explain the circumstances to other parents and friends. She had always been the family's voice of stability and reason, and now she had to translate Zach's despair into a language that the rest of the world could comprehend. Her protective instincts flared even then, because she could feel the insidious eroding of their family's reputation and the lingering criticism. When little miscommunications began to turn into conflicts, the strain at home increased. Conflict could arise from a missed task, a misplaced item, or even innocuous remarks. Each of these situations serves as a reminder of the property transaction and the broken trust. Zach made an effort to make up for it by promising to talk to Tori about any future decisions and offering tokens of kindness. But the emotional wound took a while to heal. Zach sat by himself on the porch late one evening, the farm enveloping him in silence. He considered how his snap decision had caused tension, conflict, and anxiety to spread throughout the entire family and community, in addition to providing financial comfort. He came to see that resolving one crisis had led to the emergence of another, far more complicated one. A crisis involving perception, trust, and emotional stability. Tori saw Zach's serious demeanor while she was looking out the kitchen window. Their gazes briefly locked across the yard. Although they didn't speak, both of them could see from that look how much responsibility now lay on their shoulders. Apologies and quick solutions weren't enough to restore the harmony inside the Roloff family. Openness, tolerance, and a readiness to accept criticism, not only from one another but also from everyone else, were necessary. On the outside, the property was still lovely and tranquil, but Zach and Tori understood that the fight was far from done. The internal conflicts were exacerbated by the outward demands of friends, neighbors, and extended family. The question was whether the Roloff family could weather the storm they had caused, or if one snap choice had permanently altered the course of events. Although the Roloff farm had always been a haven, it suddenly seemed to be a furnace where every error was accentuated and every conflict intensified. Zach's financial relief from selling the home had resolved one issue, but a number of social and emotional repercussions had replaced it. Extended family visits increased in frequency and were frequently accompanied by subtly critical or worried remarks. One relative stated, "We know you're trying, Zach, but this wasn't the way to handle things. The comments were kind, but Zach felt the weight of them. Even well-meaning acquaintances appeared to have a new opinion of the Roloffs, as though the family's once solid reputation had been damaged. You could feel the strain inside the house. Tori continued to be wary of Zach and no longer completely trusted his judgment. Even everyday activities, such as cooking, cleaning, and talking to the children, were tainted by the silent worry that another snap decision would upset the delicate equilibrium they had been attempting to restore. The tension was at its highest one evening. Zach was reminded that even after the sale of the property, their financial status remained unstable when a late bill arrived warning of past due payments. Fear and frustration boiled over. "Tori, we can't continue like this." Zach slammed the envelope onto the counter and yelled, "I feel like I'm not doing enough, even though I'm doing everything I can to keep us afloat." Tori, who was just as worn out, responded to his outburst with a controlled yet scathing passion. "Zach, money isn't everything. It all comes down to communication, trust, and planning before acting. You cannot continue to solve issues on your own, particularly when the repercussions affect everyone." Hearing the heightened voices, the kids withdrew to their rooms. The echoes of stress and unresolved strife now pervaded the house that had once been full of laughing. In that instant, Zach understood that he was fighting not only to save the farm monetarily, but also to protect his wife, the emotional stability of his family, and the trust he had betrayed. Zach inhaled deeply and softened his voice after a tense silence. "Tori, you're correct. I'm not able to accomplish this alone. Not just for the money, but also for ourselves, the children, and the family. I need to make amends for my mistakes. Together, we must confront this." Tori looked at him for a long time, noting the sincere regret and resolve in his eyes. "We shall," she said, "but it must be true, Zach. No more frantic decision-making. No more secrets. If we don't work together, we could lose more than just money." A shaky sense of unity reappeared that evening as the family sat down to a peaceful meal. It was brittle, nearly undetectable, yet it was there, a reminder that although one snap choice may rock the foundation, the will to face the repercussions collectively could start to rebuild it. Outside, the farm lay peacefully and unwaveringly beneath a starry sky, a mute observer of the Roloff struggles. But within, the family had reached the most crucial stage of their journey, dealing with the fallout from their decisions, facing realities they could no longer deny, and gathering the courage to defend their love for one another and their legacy. After weeks of stress and uncertainty, there was a little change in the Roloff household's mood, one of cautious optimism. Over the past few days, Zach and Tori had been having frank conversations, dismantling the barriers that had accumulated following the sale of the property. They tackled issues as collaborators rather than enemies for the first time in weeks. However, the difficulties that lay ahead could not be eliminated by optimism alone. The sale of the property had only been a short-term relief, and bills kept coming in. Zach understood that long-term fixes were required, and Tori understood that reestablishing trust required her complete participation in all future decisions. Zach came onto a possible opportunity one morning while going over financial statements. A nearby farmer was proposing a collaboration to grow the Roloff Farm's produce delivery company. Although it had hazards, it had the potential to yield substantial profits. Zach paused, thinking about the consequences of his last snap decision. Tori observed him contemplatively. She answered, "This might work, but we do it together. No hurried decisions, no secrets. We make plans, assess the dangers, and then take action." Zach nodded, appreciating her composure. They worked together to create a strategy that included labor distribution, costs, estimates, and contingencies. Every choice was well thought out, and consensus was needed for every action. The Roloff family gradually started to feel in charge of their common lives and their finances again. The change was even felt by the kids. Jackson, who had been reserved and silent, started to inquire about the farm and the new business ambitions. Lila trailed Tori around, lending a hand in little ways and taking in the peaceful vibes that now filled the house. The house felt alive again, with cautious optimism for the first time in weeks. Additionally, the couple scheduled brief moments of reconnecting. They were reminded of the reason they had created a life together on the farm by walks across the fields, peaceful evenings on the porch, and giggles while doing chores. Although still brittle, trust started to reestablish itself piece by piece. But the outside world continued to play a role. The wider family continued to wonder if Zach had actually learnt from his blunders, and neighbors kept a watchful eye on him, some of them still doubtful. Every encounter turned into a chance to demonstrate that the Roloffs were not just surviving, but also developing, learning, and adapting. The Roloffs had reached a precarious balance by the chapter's end. Although the financial crisis had not entirely been handled, the way forward was now more obvious. More significantly, Zach and Tori had started to rebuild their relationship, showing that even in the face of blunders that rock a family's foundation, a chance for forgiveness might be created by deliberate effort, openness, and support from one another. The Roloff farm's expansive sky and the infinite fields surrounding them gave the family a fresh feeling of direction. There were still obstacles to overcome, but they were resolved to do so as a team, conscious of the repercussions and more resilient as a result of the lessons they had learned. Let us know in the comments. And stay tuned by subscribe to our channel to get more updates like this. Thank you, bye guys.